Hello and welcome to Rise of Humanity. I'm your host, Chris Karamaya, and today I'm very glad to be joined by my guest, Andrea Crowder. Andrea is a health and business coach who empowers people to say no to average, mediocre, and mainstream lives and say yes to a life that they truly love. Andrea is incredibly passionate about helping women shed the weight that's holding them back in life, both figuratively and literally, and helping them to show up in the world in a big way. Andrea is also co-founder of the fitness group Misfit Republic and is a contributing author to the 101 Secrets of Untamed Entrepreneurs Revealed. So it's great to have you on the show today, Andrea. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Awesome. So could you, if we just start by giving us a bit more detail on the work you're doing in your business and what your mission is and how you are helping these women to change their lives?
I feel like my mission just gets like bigger and bigger by the day. But when I started, it was to start a part-time business while I was working a full-time normal corporate job. I worked in an office. I would drop my kids off at daycare. It was a pretty traditional, working mom life. And it started with me deciding I just wanted to make a little bit of extra side money. I didn't realize that it was going to turn into what now I believe is like why I'm here on this earth, my life purpose, to be able to continue to grow myself and to figure out how to navigate life and feel like I'm thriving and not just, showing up and doing, what we're expected to do, which is go work a job that you make enough money for to pay just enough of your bills, but really never like truly have all the things that you desire. And I thought, well, that's just okay because that's what's expected. And when I realized that me coming from a background of not having a college degree, I had a teenage pregnancy, statistically, I should be on welfare and I should be divorced. And I just decided that I wanted more. I wanted better. I wanted this like epic, fulfilling life. And it started with just this little business that I thought maybe I could make $200 a month doing this. And now it's turned into what I now believe is like my life purpose. It's my full-time income now. I don't work a traditional corporate job anymore. And I get to show up and do what I want every day. And it's so freeing and liberating.
That's so awesome. I love that. And I mean, we'll talk a little bit more about your story, and it sounds like from I've watched some of your videos online that it was a challenging journey. But what do you say to people who are wanting to begin to start making that transition from and creating that dream life? Because it's not, I mean, there's a huge amount of energy that needs to be shifted, loads of limiting beliefs, and it's, I imagine for a lot of people it's like coming up against a brick wall initially, and they might not even start. So what do you say to people who wanting to get on that path?
That's a great question. And I think having the perspective that I have now, because I've done it both ways. I've done it the hard way, where it felt sometimes painful, where sometimes it would bring me to tears. And when you want something so bad and you feel like you keep hitting a brick wall and you're just not getting there, it feels defeating and it feels frustrating. And unfortunately, most people quit. And that's just so heartbreaking to me. And I realized the secret for me, at least, and that I've seen working with other female entrepreneurs that, and this works same for men or women, doesn't matter. It's just that's my experiences working with women. But the secret has been to play more. And when I am feeling joyful about my business, when I'm infusing the things that I'm obsessed with, that I'm passionate about, and when I'm willing to just be curious about how I can make small tweaks to make things better, but to do it in a way that feels fun for me, then it doesn't feel hard. I don't feel the resistance. Things happen faster. I always say, if you want to build a business fast, have the most fun. Be the person that's like having, those are like two of my favorite F words. Fun equals fast. So, so that's what's worked for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's so funny that you mentioned that because that's definitely a huge thing that's coming up for me is because I'm starting to build my own coaching business and I initially started by working sort of 7 days a week without even thinking about it. And
Hmm.
then I just, I was just like, I'm going to take a day off. And then you create that space and so much stuff to flows in. And now it's almost as though I've kind of inverted my schedule and I feel like I'm almost spending more time having fun and enjoying life and not just got my head down at the computer. But I mean, I think a lot of people face fear around that because they think as soon as they step back, everything's going to start to snowball. I mean, is that something that you had to work through?
Yeah, I think that is such a common fear. And I think I did feel that for a long way. And what I realized, like someone had explained this and such a good visual for me. And that's that I was holding on to my business so tightly and my body was so tense that I was like blocking the blessings because when your hands are closed, you can't receive, right?
Mm,
So I was holding on to my business with like a closed fist, trying to control everything. And then as soon as I opened my hands and surrendered, I have a tattoo now on my wrist to remind me, let go,
nice.
surrender. And when I did that, it was like an avalanche of blessings coming in. My business exploded into the multi six figures in a very short period of time. And it was almost mind blowing to watch to see that I could let go, I could feel more joyful, and I could feel more. And like you, my schedule's so completely opposite. Where now I probably work like 2 to 3 hours a day. Sometimes I will say, like when I'm vibing with it, when I'm feeling in flow, I can work a 10-hour day and it's like I don't even look up from my computer. Sometimes I don't remember to eat, but
Yeah,
I'm in such flow and it doesn't feel hard. It feels so joyful and I'm so thankful to be doing that work. But if I'm forcing it and if I'm trying to hold on to it, that's when I know, okay, close the computer, walk away, get out of my laptop and into the real world. And I have to remind myself that sometimes get out of the computer and into the real world,
yeah,
Andrea.
yeah,
And then I get back into flow.
yeah. That's incredible. I love it because yeah, it's the same with me when I'm getting in the flow and I want to work, for hours and hours straight and just blast out, but I'm enjoying it. It doesn't really feel like work, and you've got
Mm-hmm.
so much passion and energy to put into it. And then when you know it's time to step back, then you step back. In terms, I mean, I think it's a journey of discovery, and you just have to figure out what works for you. But is there any kind of tips that you could share that you use specifically to create more of that time space and kind of mental space and in your routine to start kind of chipping away at that that feeling that you have to be working all the time?
I think the most important thing for me was to block time on my calendar. At first, now I'm so self-aware that I know when I just have to step away and I'll cancel a meeting if I have to,
Mm,
if I know I'm not in the right energy for it. But before that felt too scary for me. So I would just pre-block time on my schedule because I can look back and honestly, see in the moments where I had the genius idea or when I like thought to call the right person who is going to be the right connection for this project to be the most successful. And it was never when I was, hooked up and connected to my computer. It was like in the shower
mm,
or if I was just taking my dog for a walk. And so I realized like some of my most genius moments that were and I can tell you, I've had like 98% of my ideas were like total flops, but 2% were just like home runs. And that's why I'm sitting here today. So there's been so much insane failure, but I don't look at the failure as the things that like get me down anymore. I look at them as the lessons because now I really know what doesn't work. And when I have the home run sitting in my hand, I know it because I've been through so many things that I know didn't work. So whenever I see so many people get hung up, they're afraid to do the thing or to write the blog post or to reach out and pitch themselves to this person because they're afraid of rejection or they're afraid of failure. And I found like those have been the most critical moments that have helped me grow. But I can say like when I have the ideas, it's never when I'm just super connected to, and holding on too tight to my business. It's in those moments of like walking on the beach or I mean, I live in Florida, so I know not everybody can just like go for a walk with their feet in the sand, but getting your feet into real earth, or like sometimes like just taking my shoes off and standing on my patio and feeling connected to the actual earth instead of being so inside my head, and just deciding to have a present moment and notice the things around me, have, but like those, it doesn't have to be a long period. Those brief moments of just nothingness can just give you that space. Because I feel like we're always trying to be like inspired in different ways in our lives, but if you're too connected, you just don't notice it. You miss the blessing. You miss the idea. So I've learned to be, now 6 years into my business, I've not always been good at this, but I'm so fiercely protective over the white space on my calendar, because those are when like the best stuff comes out.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think, I mean, I think there's actual science behind it. Like, you could probably, you can measure, like brainwaves and all that stuff. But there's states when if you're so focused on a tiny little thing and your brain's not functioning coherently, you just won't create space for those new ideas to flow in. And that's when you talk about, like, you're out on a walk, or you're in the shower, you're on the beach. It changes the whole way you think, and then unless that's clear, you can't allow those things to flow in.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's definitely important. So, I mean, talking about your journey to getting where you are today, and I think, I mean, you mentioned a little bit earlier about, how statistically you shouldn't be where you are and all that stuff. But I mean, if you could just talk a little bit more on that. And one of the reasons I may have heard a little about it on your videos online, but your story basically is an excuse eliminator, and if you can do it and come through what you have, then anyone can do it, really. So could you just talk about some of the challenges that you face?
Yeah. I mean, in the beginning of, even as a teenager, I can definitely see where I would look back on my life and think, the normal person would think, well, that just sucks, like how my life started. My parents got divorced very early, which is common, and that, wasn't such a big deal. But I did grow up in an abusive home. My stepfather was very, he had a lot of demons haunting him. I love him, and I've like done so much forgiveness over this, but it was a very tumultuous environment to grow up in, and it was hard, I think, for me the most to see, my mom in pain. And as a small child, I wanted to save her, and that's a lot to put on a child. And it wasn't that she ever put it on me; it was something I put on myself, of like, I want to save her. But now I can look back and see why I had to go through that, why I may have like chosen that beginning of my life to create this independence, so I can go out and I can teach and empower women to be able to show up for themselves, whether it's to leave a dangerous relationship, or whether it's to leave a life that leaves you completely unfulfilled. And so coming from even just being in that type of environment as a child, and then the things that I then put myself through as a wandering teenager, where I graduated from high school with exceptional grades, and then I went into what I call my dark period, where I don't remember very much for almost a year of my life, because I was drunk, I was on drugs, I got into so many different bad relationships. I made a lot of poor decisions that I don't regret a single one of them, but they were really, really rough that I put myself through that. And then that resulted in a teenage pregnancy. And I'm a firm believer that God, decided it was time for me to get pregnant as a teenager. Really, I think saved my life. I think I probably would have continued to go down that tunnel of poor decisions that probably would have resulted in me, dying from a drug overdose or something. And so I look at my son as my little angel. He saved me. And it was almost that moment where you realize, like, I have to live for someone else now. And I remember looking into my son's face when he was born, and it was a late night, and he was crying and he was colicky. And I just sat there and I cried with him. And I just remember saying to him, I'm going to be someone that you can be proud of. And I just decided from then on out, I wanted to be the mother, the woman that my son could look up to, someone that he would hold a standard to for what a wife should look like, what the mother of his children should look like. And I knew I had to do that through leading by example. And so just the process of becoming a mother was like definitely the catalyst that said, okay, it's time to decide to choose something different. And every moment we have the power to decide to let go of all the reasons why, we shouldn't be or can't be. I didn't have the money. I didn't have the education. I didn't have the stable home and the stable upbringing. And we can all look for excuses, because I see some people in business who are like, well, I don't have that dramatic story that you have, Andrea. So I don't have, like, we all find our own excuses. Either like, I don't have the dramatic story, or my story's too dramatic,
Yeah.
right? It's amazing what the ego can do to like grab you and try to hold you and keep you down. But once you're consciously aware of it, you can say, well, today's a new day, and I can actually decide to be something different, or I can decide to choose or do differently today. And once you're willing to put the power back into your own hands, instead of saying, well, I was just, a victim of circumstance, you take your power back, and you can have anything you want as
Yeah.
long as you believe it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing. I love your perspective, because you can always choose to see the negative in everything, but
Mm-hmm.
if you see the positive, you've turned your adversity into a way to serve humanity, really, and to help women, and use all your experience, all the pain and the emotional struggle and everything, to help them get to create a new life for themselves. So
Mm-hmm.
it's amazing transition. So I mean, you mentioned when you had your son, you said that was kind of the turning point. So was that, how old were you then? Was that nine? Did you say 19?
I was 19
Yeah.
when I got pregnant with my son, and then I got married when he was 3 months old. And I'm like, by the grace of God, still married. We have been married for 14 years now, um, and that's not really when I had like this big career change and I had all the success. It was more a slow decision to become a better human and to be more self-aware, and to to want to be in a solid, strong relationship that my son could feel safe in. And so it just started with the small stuff of like a safe home for him, and
Yeah.
a place where he didn't have to worry and he could grow up feeling loved. And slowly that grew into, I started a career, and I could feel joy there. And then I realized, okay, well, maybe there's more to that than just collecting a paycheck. And maybe I could do something that has a greater impact on people. And that's when I started my business. And so that was just 6 years ago.
Nice. Awesome progression. So did
Mm-hmm.
you would you say that you evolved spiritually quite dramatically during that time? Did you feel like as the years went on, you kind of became connected to something bigger, or was it kind of always there?
I was raised in a Christian home for all of my childhood. And then I married a non believer, and that shook me at my core because I fell deeply in love with a man with a very, very scientific brain, and just can't seem to comprehend what I felt was my true belief as a Christian at that time. And so I kind of turned away from my religion for a little while, because I felt a little jaded, because I thought, according to traditional Christian belief, that this beautiful man that came in and married me when I was pregnant, he was not the father of my son, and loved me anyway, and has loved my son anyway, and has raised him as his own, has just been almost like a knight in shining armor
Yeah.
for me. According to my faith, he's going to go burn in a fiery pit of hell for all of eternity because he doesn't accept God. And that rocked me at my core. And
Mm.
so I turned away from my faith for a long time, because I just remember saying, well, if he's not going to heaven, I'm not going to heaven. And just became so stubborn. And it was really through business that I refound my faith, which feels so non-traditional, but it was just in the last, I want to say 6 or 7 years, people have become more open about talking about faith through business, which I think has been incredible to see. Before it was very like, it was a big no-no. Like you never mention your faith or your religion in any type of business or branding. And now it's like people are all out with it. And it's such an incredible thing to witness shifting in the world. But I think that maybe just in the last 5 years, I have grown, I feel like lifetimes
Yeah.
in my faith and my spirituality and all the things that I have learned and finally come to peace with my husband's not going to burn in a fiery pit of hell for all eternity, which I'm so thankful for.
Yeah.
But it is now the piece of me that I cherish the most. And even though I still am married to a non-believer, I can see little areas of him where he's like, and I realize that the only way that I will ever be able to gift people what I now cherish so much that I find so exciting and so interesting is just really through how I live my life and through example. And I think that he does see how fulfilled I am and how happy and joyful I am. And I know that he notices, and I see it in other people too, especially people who felt totally shunned by traditional religion. They've reached out to me and they said, through the way that you speak and the way that your relationship with your faith is, it feels more interesting and it feels safe and acceptable. Whereas before I was like, would feel like the black sheep walking into a church. So,
Yeah. That's awesome. So just in terms of your business that you're running today, I looked on your website and you've done some training with some awesome people: Tony Robbins, Bo Eason, Marie Forleo. What did that look like, and what impact has that had for you in moving forward?
I am just a student at heart for forever. So any opportunity that I can get into a room and be with someone in their like in-person live energy, I'm gonna do it. And I, of course, I read books and I do stuff like that. But like being in those atmospheres where you can feel that person's like gifts and their energy is something that over the last 6 years I've tried very intentionally to, even when I wasn't making money yet, to put myself physically into a room, to go to conferences, to sign up for some of the smaller, more intimate experiences, to work with people. Brendan Burchard was a big one where I paid an exorbitant amount of money twice to go get into a smaller room with him to get more trained to be able to help people at a deeper level. And it just was, I think, those skill sets have served me and will continue to serve me like for the rest of my life. I'm so thankful that I was willing to think bigger and see, expenses like that in my business as an investment. And I can totally see where those like investments, even when I felt scared to make the investment, I can see where it did pay off financially, as long as you're willing to execute what you learn, which is always, doesn't matter what you know, it matters what you do, right?
Yeah. And it's it can be scary to invest money, but I mean the way I look at it is you really, if you do your research and you find someone good, you're investing energy. And why you might feel like, oh, I've just spent all that money, and you might feel a little bit of a loss, if you stick with it and you don't panic and you take the time and do the work, then eventually you'll get all that energy back like tenfold, and the impact is that having your life can be completely transformative. I mean, is that what you found to be true?
Yeah, and there's even been times where I did invest money and it was probably a hasty decision and a mistake. But like I said, any failure or mistake is always like a learning point. And so I did learn to sit with myself a little bit longer because I can be impulsive, especially when it comes to investing in education, because I love to learn so much. But I found that for me, I know myself and I know that I learn and I get the most out of an experience when I actually put myself into a room for like a live conference or where you're surrounded by the energy of other people. And it's what Tony Robbins talks about, the concept of immersion.
Mm.
So when I totally immerse myself instead of, picking up a book here and there, if I'm going to read now, sometimes what I'll do is I'll just go on a really long walk and I'll get 3 hours of content and just really immerse myself and feel with it. But really being in a room for, 3, 4, 5 days for just completely learning new concepts and new ideas have been like the biggest game changers for me, because all I'm doing is being wrapped up in it. And Tony Robbins and Brendan Burchard and like Chalene Johnson is another one. Those are people where you're not just sitting there taking notes, you're standing up and you're practicing these principles and you're having conversations with people and you're sharing your story, and you're doing work there. So it's like embedding it in you at a cellular level. So you don't
Mm.
walk out of there, exhausted and just forget everything. You're really like practicing these skill sets and walking out of there ready to use some of them almost immediately.
Yeah, that's so cool, and yeah, it's a new level, really. I mean, you can learn huge amounts from books, but especially, I mean, I think one of the powers of kind of retreats and seminars and things like that is that you are in an unfamiliar environment, and when you can take your focus off, everything, especially if you've got a rough life, when you can take your focus off everything just for a few days, it allows that new reality to flow in. But if you're surrounded by everything that always reminds you of how bad everything is, it makes it very difficult. And I think, again, like going for a long walk and getting out in nature is another powerful example, because you kind of just can let go of who you think you are for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Especially if you, and I know this happens so often for a lot of women that I work with, if you live in a home where your significant other just doesn't get it, like
Mm.
they just don't understand what they're doing, and if the money's not, they tend to start to understand and support it more once the money starts rolling in.
Yeah.
But before that, it's like, what's that silly little hobby that you're working on? Sometimes when you're trying to get a business off the ground, they don't sometimes understand the vision. And so when you're in a bubble where you can't like fully express who you are, what you want to do, and there's doubters and naysayers, you do have to find protective times to be able to be alone or to be around people that fully get it. So those immersion moments, the conferences, the retreats, all that stuff are really powerful, because everyone around you is like, yeah, go girl, or like, dude, you so got that business idea is incredible. Sometimes you have to create that environment for yourself if you're not already gifted with it.
Yeah, that's cool. So in terms of the lifestyle that you've been able to create for yourself now, what kind of, I mean, we talked a little bit about how many hours you can work and stuff, but what kind of inspiration can you give to people who are stuck in, working 40 plus hours in a week, in a job that they don't like, and are thinking of starting their own business, but are scared maybe of taking their life to the next level? What are some of the best things that they can expect if they make that leap?
So, I mean, freedom of time feels like everything. But I
Mm.
will say I did start my business, and once I caught the vision of like, wow, this can be something so much more. We were $100,000 in debt when I started my business, and I thought like, wow, if we could pay off that debt, the energetic weight that it would take off of our family would be life changing.
Yeah.
And so that was the first thing that I really grasped onto. But what I found myself doing was I started resenting my job, because I felt like it was pulling time away from my business, and I had to show up for this in this environment that I didn't love as much as where I was now going. And if I could say one thing to the people who are working a full-time job or thinking about or also starting a business, it's that to prosper where you're planted, and gratitude is like whoa, that's like the secret sauce to gratitude and fun and play. Those are that little combination right there is like the dynamic duo that will get you there faster. But if you start to resent the money that's coming in to pay your bills, it's almost like you're putting up this negative vibe towards money and your business will grow slower. And I did experience that for about 18 months in my business where I'm like, why am I not where I want to be? I want to be able to quit this job. I don't want to show up here anymore. I want my freedom of time. And I was just putting up this like energetic wall of keeping it. So once I started feeling more gratitude for my job. And I realized, okay, I'm here. I have to spend my time here. So whatever I do, I'm going to do it with joy and I'm going to do it with a grateful heart. And so I showed up and I was like, where can I improve? Like, how can I improve this environment? How can I improve my work experience? How can I improve it for myself, improve it for other people? And as I started to grow and I started to feel more joyful and I started to feel more grateful, my business actually started expanding so much faster. And it took me about 2 years to be able to match my full-time income. I thought I would do it in one. And I had so many lessons that I had to learn along the way. I'm glad that I didn't get frustrated and give up. But after that 2 year mark, I walked away from my full-time job at about 2.25 years. We paid off our $100,000 worth of debt. And then around that point, over the next 18 months, we catapulted up into the 6-figure income. And then the next year into the multi-6-figure income. And coming from my husband's in the military, they don't make very much money. It was to see that kind of money coming into our house. It was so mind blowing to be able to know that I was earning such an exceptional income doing something that was making such a huge impact in other people's lives. It was just, and to know that my children will be able to grow up and I didn't have to freak out if they wanted to go on like the class school trip or last year at the end of the year, they wanted to bring all the kids to Disney World and we had just moved to Florida. And I also wanted to put my kids in a good school district. And there's not actually very many school districts that have good school ratings. And so because of this income, we were able to make a decision to work or to live in a more high-end area that had some of the best schools in the entire country. And that right there was like that moment of like, 14 years ago when I looked at my son and his face and I said, I promise I'll be someone you'll be proud of. That was a full circle moment to be able to pick this home, I can look outside my house and I see water and I, have my kids in one of the top rated schools in the country and they're excelling in school. And I'm just like, oh, I did it.
Nice.
I fucking did it.
That's such an awesome story, and I love what you said about being grateful for where you are, because I've had like a number of jobs over the years that I really kind of struggled going to, and but one of the things that I realised is that I knew I didn't want to stay long term, that I could always find reasons to be grateful, and I think it's finding that balance of just accepting it's not your dream job, but having that gratitude for having an income. And it's just like, when I look back now, it's when you kind of get into that flow, you can just enjoy a job for a period of time. I think once you allow that gratitude, eventually when you're supposed to leave, you'll just be guided out of that situation. So
absolutely.
Cool. So I was looking through your blog on your website, and I was just wondering if you could share this awesome story of when you gave all your money away. It's so cool. I just wanted to make sure everybody else was able to hear it.
Yeah, that's actually a fun story. So this is really around the time where I started studying, principles like the law of attraction, and also realizing that I knew that I wanted my income in my business to not just make exceptional money, but also make an exceptional impact in the world. And I wanted to see those two be very like tied closely together.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wasn't making very much money at the time, but we had actually put aside $4,000, which felt like the most money. It was the most money we'd ever saved. And we were going to go on this trip to Italy to see our friends get married. And it was my dream trip to go to Italy. And, I remember, let's see, I haven't like thought about this story in so long, so let me just make sure I tell it in proper order. But I remember sitting on an airplane, and I was traveling a lot for work, and I remember just saying a prayer to God, like, okay, God, like, where do you want to see my business go? And I felt all of a sudden, for the first time in my life, like I had heard the true voice of God saying, like, this is going to happen. And then I heard this little voice that said, but you can't go to Italy. And I was like, hold up. No, I've been saving up for Italy for over a year. It was the only time I'd ever really stuck and been able to put money away. And I was like, I heard that wrong. And then, of course, I was like, well, how am I going to explain this to my husband? Because he's a total non-believer. How am I going to tell him? Like, I just heard the voice of God and he told us we can't go to Italy. So, and those have always been my moments when I like speak to him, and I truly realized like God's like stirring in his heart. I know it, because when I came home, I'm like, babe, you're going to think I'm crazy. And I sat down and I told him, and I was like, this is where I feel like my business is going to go, but I feel like we're not supposed to go to Italy. And he just looked at me and he's like, okay, if you don't think we should go. And I was like, what? Like it was like God had already calmed his heart before I even got there.
Mm.
And so that was like the first moment of me realizing like, okay, if I'm going to surrender and if I'm really going to like follow and use my intuition to make good decisions to be able to see this girl, like I'm just going to have total blind faith and why I shouldn't be there. So it made no sense to me why I couldn't go to Italy at the time. But as I went off to church, I can't remember how long later, if it was a couple weeks or even a couple months, but I remember I almost didn't go to church that day. And my husband was like, aren't you going to church? And I'm like, why do you care? So he was kind of nudging me out the door, and he's like, you're just happier when you go to church, so go. And so I did. And I was, rushing off to church. But I remember reading in a book called The Circle Maker by Mark Batterson, who is actually the pastor of our church, but a very well-known in New York Times bestselling author as well. Mm-hmm. And I remember reading in this book saying sometimes you're called to give more than you have, or more than you feel comfortable giving, more than like a traditional 10% that often churches would suggest that you give out of your income. And so I said, okay, God, I do feel called in my heart to give a little bit more. How much? And I sat there in the pews at church, and I remember praying like why everybody was getting seated and saying how much. And all of a sudden I heard the voice again, and it said all of it. And I was like, come again. And then as we went through service, I realized like why we were meant to give. And they had told this story about a young girl who was suffering through like Christian persecution was like a big thing in Africa. And her, I think it was her father and her brother had been shot in front of her and died. And they were trying to bring her back to the States and get her adopted by a family. And my heart just broke. Like I was thinking of, my daughter, and if she had seen that happen, and I'm like, I feel like this is why God told me I need to give my money away. And so I called, and I remember sitting there in the pews praying and saying, okay, God, I'm going to have complete and utter faith in this moment, and I will give every penny in our bank account, but you're going to have to call my husband first, so to speak. And so I called my husband after church, and I said, like, okay, again, I know you're going to think I'm a little crazy, but I think the voice of God just told me to give all our money away. And then I explained to him what was going on. And all of a sudden and my husband's in the military, and he said, okay, just don't use our debit card. And I was like, what? You just told me I could give every single penny. Like I couldn't even go grocery shopping if I gave away. I was like, we're just going to have to eat food that we already have in our house, even if it's weird meals that don't make sense together until the next payday. And he's like, okay. And I was like, okay, God, I hear you loud and clear. You are like, you're going to make this happen for me. So we wrote a check, and it turned out to be exactly enough money to get her here. The only hitch was that there were some of the legal paperwork adoption issues that weren't going through. So a piece of the story that wasn't mine was that on a Sunday when I think I was traveling or I hadn't made it to church, they had shared that they were trying to get her over to the States, but they needed a host family. And it just so happened that this family, it was their very first time coming to the church. They showed up and they're like, well, we'll take her. So it was like just this divine moment for them to be there in the moment, to be able to take her. Mm-hmm. And then the money that we had donated was exactly enough to be able to pay for the fees and the travels. And then on the weekend that I was supposed to be in Italy, our friends were posting all of these pictures of the most epic Italian wedding and the food and the wine. And I was feeling a little bitter. Like, okay, God, I know that I was meant to do this and I'm grateful for the role that we played in this, but I'm a little sad today. So I went to church that morning. And it was the morning that I should have been in Italy, and I showed up for church and we were there very late. So we were in like all the way in the back, the last seats available. And they said, hey, we have a surprise guest. And it was the girl that had finally made it over to the States. And she had shown up to church that day in the most epic, beautiful, like pink princess dress. You would think Disney princess dress. And she, like, I would have completely missed that experience of being able to meet her. She didn't know that our family played any role in that. We didn't say anything. It was just, walking up, and I said, hey, I'd like to be able to promote, the business that was doing all the different work to get her over here. I was like, I'd love to be able to share more information about you guys on my website. Can I take a picture with you? And so they were both gracious and sat there and took a picture with us. And it was one of those like full circle moments to be able to, if people think miracles are not real, like every moment I shouldn't have been there, or we shouldn't have had enough, or my husband should have said no, it was like everything that should have been a block became a blessing and resulted in this real life miracle that not only I got to witness, but my kids got to witness. They were a part of the whole thing. And so it was just, I know that it'll be a meaningful moment that I'll remember for the rest of my life. And it was a true testament of faith for them to be able to witness as well.
Wow, what an awesome story. Thank you for sharing that. And
my business exploded after that.
I was going to say, did it have some extra knock-on effect that you maybe hadn't anticipated?
Yes, a ton.
It's a defining moment then. We listened to the guidance and you acted upon it and you benefited from it. So yeah, really amazing.
It was a lot of blind faith, but it was one of the most fulfilling experiences ever. And I've been through so many other, maybe not as like grand long-term, like that was a period of about, I want to say 9 months, maybe even almost a year that all of that was happening. So it wasn't like just, within a week, all of this happened and it was crazy. It took patience and it took faith, and to be able to see it come full circle, you realize like there's so much happening, and like God is constantly trying to use us to create these miracles. And we get to choose to be a part of it. And like, yes, it was so nice to see the income and my business explode, but like that was definitely not the most fulfilling part. It was seeing that girl's face. I just sat in that back pew and I was like, thank God I was late and I'm all the way in the back, or people would see me bawling like a baby.
Nice. That's awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. So there's a question I like to ask all my guests in my interviews, and that is, what would be your best advice on how people can contribute to the rise of humanity?
I feel like the best contribution that I've made is through my own personal self-discovery and reflection. And as I become a better human, it inspires other people to want to become a better human as well. As your light starts to shine brighter, other people see it and they see through you and through your story that it's possible. So, number one, work on yourself and just focus on becoming. Self care is not selfish, it's the biggest act of generosity that you could possibly make, because as you become brighter and better and happier and more joyful, people look at you living this best life and they realize that they don't have to be a part of a statistic. They can have the money and they can have the happy marriage and they can have the happy kids. And sure, there's hard days, but showing people the realness of all of it, that overall you can live this like very beautiful, exceptional life, is so inspiring. But you also have to be willing to put your story out there and get a little bit vulnerable, because the piece that does inspire people is to show them where you were before and where you are now and how you got there, to show them that if they're in that same space. And that's another area where I say, like, don't judge your story, because there's someone else out there with the same story and they just need to see you doing it. And they need to see that if it's possible for you, it's possible for them. But they don't know it unless you're willing to become, a little bit courageous to be able to put yourself out there and be in that vulnerable state where it feels scary. It feels like you're standing there naked on the internet, waiting for people to either throw tomatoes or to throw, you a big party. So, and you never know. But it's not my job to judge how my story is received. It's just my job to share it. And I'm sure that there are people out there who have seen my story or read my story or watched videos, and I'll never know them. I'll never hear from them, but I know that I've made an impact on them, and that is so worth its weight in gold to me.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So, would you like to just share with the listeners where they can find more out about you and your work?
Yes, I'm spending a lot of time on Instagram right now.
Okay.
So love_Andrea Crowder on Instagram, especially Instagram stories. I think it's one of my favorite platforms right now, because I do love to give people the raw realness, and I show people like when I'm in the hustle and when I'm in the flow and how I'm doing that, and the rituals and the tools and all the things I use to be in that space, and the silly side of my life too. So people can I feel like people can like almost vibe off of my energy really beautifully through those like little 15-second clips of my life, and see how it's done. So that's been an amazing space that I'm currently obsessed with. But also AndreaCrowderFitness.com is my blog, and that's another place to find me.
Awesome. And I'll stick both of those in the show notes so people can check them out and follow you on Instagram.
Awesome.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show today. It's been a great conversation, and thank you for sharing your inspirational story with the listeners today and how you're impacting the world.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. So that is all for today, guys. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you've gotten some big takeaways from Andrea's story and some new beliefs that you can use to empower yourself, because she has a truly inspirational story. So that is all for today. I'll catch you all next time. Take care. Bye-bye.